The stars looked cold and empty through the window of the ship. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the observation room, drinking his third cup of coffee that morning. He was tired. 3 months in deep space could do that to anyone. The same walls, the same people, the same routine every single day. Jake was a man in his late 30s with dark hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. He had the kind of face that looked friendly even when he was serious. Right now he was trying to stay awake while his ship, the Wanderer's Dawn, moved through an area of space that no human had ever visited before. The mission was simple on paper. Map new star systems, look for anything interesting, and send reports back to Earth. So far they had found a lot of rocks, some ice, and more empty space. Nothing exciting, nothing that would make this long journey feel worth it. Then the alarm sounded. Jake dropped his coffee cup and ran to the bridge. His crew was already there, staring at the screens with wide eyes. Lieutenant Amy Brooks, his communications officer, turned to look at him. She was a young woman with red hair tied back in a tight bun, and she looked excited and nervous at the same time. "Captain, you need to see this," Amy said. She pointed at the main screen. On the screen was something that made Jake forget all about being tired. A massive structure floated in space, orbiting a dying red star. It was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. Towers made of crystal rose from its surface, glowing with soft blue and purple light. The whole thing seemed to pulse like it was alive. "That's not natural," said Dr. Carl Peters, the ship's doctor and scientist. He was an older man with white hair and glasses that were always sliding down his nose. "That's a space station. Someone built that." Jake felt his heart beat faster. First contact. This was what every space explorer dreamed about. Meeting another intelligent species. Making history. "Try to send them a message," Jake ordered. "Use all the standard greeting protocols." Amy worked at her console, sending out signals in every format they had. Mathematical patterns, simple images, radio waves. Everything they could think of to say hello to whoever lived in that massive station. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the ship shook. Alarms started going off everywhere. Jake grabbed onto his chair as the whole ship lurched to one side. "We're caught in something," shouted the pilot, Ben Murphy. He was a young man from Texas who could fly anything, but right now he was fighting with the controls and losing. Some kind of beam. "It's pulling us in!" Jake watched as the station got bigger and bigger on the screen. They were being dragged toward it, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The beam holding them was stronger than anything their ship could produce. "Everyone stay calm," Jake said, even though his own heart was racing. "We're going to be okay. Just stay calm." The ship was pulled inside the station through a massive opening. They found themselves in a docking bay that could have held 50 ships their size. The walls glowed with that same blue and purple light. Strange symbols covered every surface. When the ship finally stopped moving, Jake stood up. His legs felt shaky, but he tried not to show it. His crew looked at him, waiting for orders. "Check all systems," he said. "Make sure we can still fly if we need to. Amy, keep trying to communicate. Tell them we come in peace." Before Amy could respond, something appeared on the external cameras. Beings were approaching their ship. Jake leaned forward to get a better look, and his breath caught in his throat. They looked like giant insects. They walked on 2 legs but had 4 arms. Their bodies were covered in hard shells that shined like polished black stone. They had big heads with eyes that reflected the light in strange ways. Each one was at least 7 feet tall. Jake heard someone gasp behind him. He understood the reaction. These beings looked nothing like humans. They were alien in every way. "They're trying to board us," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. "Let them," Jake decided. He saw the shocked looks from his crew. "We came out here to meet new life. Well, here it is. We're going to be polite and we're going to be brave. Everyone with me to the airlock. Ben, you stay here and be ready to send a message to Earth if things go wrong." Jake led a small group to the airlock. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, but he kept his face calm. The airlock opened, and 3 of the insect beings entered. They moved with a strange grace, their multiple arms moving in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. One of them stepped forward. It made a series of clicks and humming sounds. Jake had no idea what it meant, but Amy was already working with her translation computer. After a moment, a mechanical voice spoke through the speakers. "You have entered the territory of the Zetharian Empire. The Queen demands your presence. You will follow us. It was not a request." Jake nodded slowly. "Tell them we accept the invitation," he said to Amy. "We're honored to meet their queen." The Zetharians led them through the station. Jake tried to take in everything he saw. The corridors were enormous, with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows. Thousands of Zytharians moved through the halls, going about their daily business. They all stopped to stare at the humans. Some pointed with their multiple arms. Others made clicking sounds that the translator couldn't interpret. Dr. Peters walked beside Jake, his eyes wide with wonder. "This is incredible," he whispered. "Look at the architecture. Look at how they move. I've never seen anything like this." They walked for what felt like miles. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors. The doors were carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. The Zytharian guards pushed the doors open, and Jake got his first look at the throne room. It was the biggest room Jake had ever seen. So big that clouds actually formed near the ceiling. Pillars of crystal rose from the floor, each one glowing with inner light. Hundreds of Zytharians filled the room, all dressed in elaborate robes and decorations. They stood in perfect silence. At the far end of the room, on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, sat the queen. Queen Thessaravik was even bigger than the other Zytharians. She had to be at least 12 feet tall. Her shell was not black like the others, but showed colors that shifted between deep purple and blue. Patterns covered her body, patterns that looked almost like art. Her 4 arms were folded in front of her in a way that seemed both graceful and powerful, but it was her eyes that caught Jake's attention. They were huge, each one the size of his head. They had thousands of tiny facets that caught the light and made them shine like jewels. When she looked at him, Jake felt like she could see right through him. The queen rose from her throne. The movement was smooth and elegant, like a dancer. She came down the steps toward Jake and his crew. Every Zytharian in the room seemed to hold their breath. Jake stood his ground even though his instincts told him to back away. The queen was intimidating, not just because of her size, but because of the way she moved, the way she commanded the room. This was someone used to being obeyed. She stopped a few feet in front of Jake. Her antennae, which swept back from her head like a crown, twitched slightly. The room was so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Then the queen spoke. Her voice came through the translator, but Jake could hear the real sound underneath. It was musical, like wind chimes mixed with the hum of distant thunder. "You are the first of your kind we have encountered," the queen said. Her voice was formal, but there was something else in it. Something that sounded almost like nervousness. "We have traveled the stars for 3,000 years. We have built an empire that spans 100 worlds. We have never met another species that did not flee at the sight of us." She paused. Her eyes seemed to search Jake's face. The whole room waited. "I must ask you something," the queen continued. Her voice became quieter, more personal. "It is a question I have wanted to ask for centuries, but never had the chance." Jake nodded. "Ask anything, Your Majesty." The queen's antennae drooped slightly. In that moment, she didn't look like a powerful monarch. She looked vulnerable, uncertain, almost afraid. "Am I hideous to you, human?" The question hung in the air. Jake could feel his crew tense up behind him. He could see the other Zytharians leaning forward, waiting for his answer. This was clearly important. More important than he had first realized. Jake looked at the queen. He really looked at her, not just as an alien or a potential threat, but as a person asking an honest question. He saw the way the light played across her shell, creating patterns that changed as she moved. He saw the elegance in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes, the careful way she held herself. And then, before he could stop himself, Jake Morrison started to laugh. End of part 1. The sound of Jake's laughter filled the enormous throne room. It was not a small chuckle or a polite laugh. It was real, deep laughter that came from his chest and echoed off the crystal walls. The sound seemed to bounce around the massive space, getting louder until it felt like the whole room was shaking with it. Every Zytharian in the room froze. They had never heard anything quite like it. The guards reached for their weapons. The advisors made shocked clicking sounds. A tall Zytharian in elaborate robes who stood near the throne hissed with anger. Amy grabbed Jake's arm and tried to pull him back. "Captain, what are you doing?" she whispered urgently. Her face had gone pale. She was certain that Jake had just made a terrible mistake, one that would get them all killed. But Jake couldn't stop laughing. He bent over slightly, one hand on his stomach, tears starting to form in his eyes. He laughed so hard that he had to take a moment to catch his breath. The queen stood completely still. Her antennae stopped moving. Her compound eyes focused entirely on Jake. The whole court waited to see what she would do. Would she order his death? Would she consider this an insult worthy of war? Finally, Jake managed to control himself. He straightened up and wiped the tears from his eyes. He was still smiling widely, his face red from laughing so hard. He looked at the Queen and there was no fear in his eyes. Only genuine amusement. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Jake said, still catching his breath. "I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the question. Hideous. You're asking me if you're hideous?" He shook his head and gestured around the magnificent throne room. "Look at this place. Look at you. Your Majesty, I've been stuck on a small ship for 3 months with the same 46 people. Before that, I spent 2 years on Mars staring at red rocks and dirt. And before that, I grew up in Detroit, which is not exactly the most beautiful place on Earth." Jake took a step closer to the Queen. The guards tensed, but the Queen raised one hand, signaling them to wait. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Jake continued. "I see those colors on your shell that change when you move. I've never seen anything like that. It's like watching art that's alive. I see the way you move, so smooth and graceful. Human dancers train their whole lives to move half as well as you do naturally." He pointed to her eyes, and those eyes. "They're incredible. They catch the light in 1,000 different ways. It's like looking into a jewel, except better because you're alive. You can think and feel and talk." Jake's smile softened. "Hideous. Your Majesty, you're probably the most beautiful thing I've seen in 5 years. And trust me, that's saying something, because space can be pretty amazing when you're not looking at the same walls every day." The throne room remained silent. Amy stood with her mouth open, not sure if she should be relieved or still worried. Dr. Peters was staring at Jake like he had never really known him before. The Queen's antennae began to twitch. It was a slow movement at first, then faster. The translator picked up the sounds she was making, but it struggled to find the right words. Finally, it settled on something simple. "You mean this," the Queen said. It was not a question. She was trying to understand. "You truly do not find us frightening or repulsive?" "Not even a little bit," Jake confirmed. "Different, yes. New, absolutely. But frightening? No. You're just people who happen to look different from us. That's not scary. That's interesting." Amy had been working frantically with her computer while Jake talked. Now she stepped forward, her expression excited despite her nervousness. "Your Majesty," Amy said carefully, "I've been reviewing the data we have. Your species evolved alone on your world, didn't you? You were the only intelligent life form on your planet." The Queen turned her attention to Amy. "This is correct. We developed consciousness, built civilizations, and reached for the stars. We thought we would find others like us out here. Instead, we found only silence and fear." "That explains it," Amy said. She looked at Jake, then back at the Queen. "Humans are different. We evolved on a planet full of other species. Millions of them. Insects, birds, fish, mammals, reptiles. We grew up surrounded by life in every shape and size you can imagine." Dr. Peters joined the conversation. "She's right, Your Majesty. Throughout our history, humans have lived alongside creatures that look nothing like us. We've had to learn that different doesn't mean dangerous. Some of us even keep insects as pets or study them for their entire lives." The doctor smiled. "When I was a child, I used to catch bugs and keep them in jars so I could watch them. My mother hated it, but I thought they were fascinating. I would spend hours just watching how they moved, how they communicated with each other." The tall Zetharian in the elaborate robes, who had hissed earlier, stepped forward. "I am High Chancellor Vexthol," the translator announced. "How do we know you speak the truth? Perhaps this is a trick to make us lower our guard." Jake turned to face him. "Fair question. I can't prove it to you with words. But think about it. If we wanted to trick you, would we do it by laughing at your Queen? Would we tell you that we think you're beautiful? Those aren't the actions of people trying to be sneaky. Besides," Jake added, "you grabbed our ship and dragged us here. We didn't come looking for a fight. We're explorers, not soldiers. Look at our ship if you want. You'll see that we're barely armed. We came out here to find new things, new people. Well, we found you. And honestly, we're pretty excited about it." The Queen began to make a sound. It started soft, then grew louder. The translator struggled with it for a moment before identifying it as a form of laughter. The Queen was laughing. The sound was nothing like human laughter. It was a chittering musical noise that seemed to fill the air. but the emotion behind it was clear. The Queen was amused. More than that, she seemed pleased. "You laugh at the absurdity of my question," the Queen said when she stopped. "Not at me, but at the idea that I should even need to ask it. This is a new experience for us." She moved closer to Jake again. This time, there was no formality in her movements. She seemed curious, like a child discovering something wonderful for the first time. "For 3,000 years we have built our empire," the Queen said softly. "We have created beautiful things. We have achieved great technological advances. We have art and music and literature, but we have always been alone. Every species we encountered either attacked us or fled from us. We began to wonder if perhaps we were meant to be isolated, if maybe there was something wrong with us." Jake's smile faded into something more serious. "There's nothing wrong with you, Your Majesty. The problem wasn't you. It was them. They didn't take the time to really look, to really see. They just reacted to what was different. And humans don't do this," Vexthol challenged. "You never fear what is different?" "Oh, we do," Jake admitted. "We're not perfect. Humans have been afraid of each other for stupid reasons throughout our history. We've fought wars over differences much smaller than species. The color of someone's skin, the language they speak, the gods they worship. We've done terrible things because of fear." He met Vexthol's gaze steadily. "But we learned. We're still learning. We figured out that being different doesn't make someone an enemy. It makes them interesting. It makes them someone we can learn from." Jake turned back to the Queen. "Your Majesty, humans have a strange habit. We tend to find friends in the weirdest places. We make friends with animals that could kill us. We create stories about forming friendships with robots, aliens, monsters, anything you can think of. It's kind of our thing," he grinned again. "Half my crew probably grew up watching movies where beings like you were the heroes. Where I'm from, kids dress up like aliens for Halloween. They think it's cool. They think it's fun." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Her antennae moved in complex patterns. Amy's translator identified the movements as deep thought mixed with hope and uncertainty. "This changes everything," the Queen finally said. "If what you say is true, if your species truly sees us as you claim, then we are not alone anymore. After 3,000 years, we have finally found someone who does not fear us." She raised all four of her arms in a gesture that seemed both welcoming and ceremonial. "Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, you and your crew are guests of the Zetharian Empire. We have much to discuss, much to learn from each other, but first we must celebrate. It is not every day that one discovers they are no longer alone in the universe." The throne room erupted in sounds. The Zetharians clicked and hummed and made noises that the translator couldn't fully interpret. But the emotion was clear. They were excited. They were happy. After thousands of years of isolation, they had finally found someone who saw them not as monsters but as people. Jake felt Amy grab his arm. "Captain, do you realize what just happened?" She whispered. "We just made first contact. Real first contact. And it went well." It actually went well. Jake looked around the throne room, at the alien beings who were no longer looking at him with suspicion but with curiosity and welcome. He thought about the Queen's question and his honest answer. He thought about how sometimes the simplest truths could change everything. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Yeah, I think we did." The feast that followed was unlike anything the humans had ever experienced. The Zetharians brought out dishes that glowed with soft light. Some of the food actually moved on the plates. Dr. Peters quickly realized that most of it was completely incompatible with human biology, but the gesture was what mattered. Jake pulled out the emergency coffee rations from the Wanderer's Dawn. He showed the Zetharian nobles how to brew it, though he wasn't sure if they could actually drink it. The smell alone seemed to fascinate them. They passed the cup around, each one taking a careful sniff and making interested clicking sounds. One young Zetharian, who introduced himself as Thelazir, was particularly curious about everything human. He was a scientist and he had a million questions. How did humans see with only 2 eyes? How did they manage with only 2 arms? What was it like to have soft skin instead of a protective shell? "It's weird," admitted Ben, the pilot. "I mean, having a shell sounds pretty useful. No need for clothes in space, right? Built-in armor. That's pretty cool." Thelazir made a sound that the translator identified as amusement. "But you can feel textures with your entire body. We can only feel through our legs and the tips of our fingers. And your faces are so expressive. We must use our antennae and body language to show emotion. You can do it all with just the movements of your mouth and eyes." The more they talked, the more both sides realized how much they could learn from each other. Dr. Peters ended up in a corner with several Zytharian doctors, drawing diagrams and comparing notes on biology. Amy worked with the court linguists, discovering that the Zytharian language was incredibly complex, with layers of meaning that humans could barely understand. But as the celebration continued, Jake noticed something. Despite all the joy and excitement, there was a sadness underneath. He saw it in the art that decorated the walls, beautiful paintings and sculptures, but all of them seemed lonely somehow. The music was lovely, but it had a melancholy tone that made him think of empty houses and long winters. He mentioned it to the Queen, who had come to sit beside him. "Your art is beautiful, Your Majesty, but it seems sad." The Queen's antennae drooped slightly. "You are perceptive, Captain. Yes, our culture is colored by our isolation. We have created beauty for ourselves because there was no one else to create it for. We have sung songs to the empty stars. We have written stories about meeting others, but they were always just fantasies." She gestured to the grand hall around them. "All of this magnificence and no one to share it with. That is why I asked you that question. After so long alone, I had to know if there was something wrong with us. If we were meant to be isolated forever." Jake felt a deep sympathy for her. He tried to imagine what it would be like for humanity to reach the stars and find nothing but empty planets and species that ran away in fear. It would be heartbreaking. "You're not alone anymore," Jake said firmly. "We're here, and I promise you there's a lot more where we came from. Humans are going to be very excited to meet you." But not everyone was happy about the situation. Jake noticed that High Chancellor Vexthal kept watching him with suspicious eyes. The old Chancellor had several other Zytharians gathered around him, and they seemed to be having serious discussions. Later that evening, Amy pulled Jake aside. "Captain, we need to talk. I've been picking up some concerning chatter. There's a faction among the Zytharians who don't trust us. They think this is some kind of trick." Jake nodded. "I saw it. Vexthal and his friends. Can't really blame them, I suppose. We show up out of nowhere, and suddenly their queen is talking about ending 3,000 years of isolation. That's a big change. What do we do about it?" Amy asked. "We be honest," Jake said. "Same as we've been doing. We can't force them to trust us. All we can do is show them who we really are and hope that's enough." The next day, Jake met with the Queen and her council. Vexthal was there along with a military commander named Krikstar. They both looked skeptical. "Your Majesty," Vexthal began, "with respect, we must consider this situation carefully. We know nothing about these humans beyond what they tell us. How do we know their acceptance is genuine? How do we know this isn't a strategy to weaken our defenses?" Krikstar added, "And even if these particular humans are sincere, what about the rest of their species? Can we trust all humans based on the word of 47 individuals?" Jake stood up. "Those are fair questions. I'd be asking the same things if I were in your position. Here's what I can tell you. We need to contact Earth. We need to let them know what we've found, and you need to meet more humans than just us." He looked at the Queen. "Your Majesty, send some of your people to Earth, not as conquerors or even as formal diplomats. Send them as observers. Let them see how humans really live. Let them interact with regular people, not just military or government officials. If we're lying about accepting you, they'll find out quickly enough." The room fell silent. It was a bold suggestion. Sending Zytharians to Earth meant making themselves vulnerable. It meant trusting humans with the safety of their people. The Queen's antennae twitched thoughtfully. "This is a radical idea, Captain, but perhaps that is what this situation requires. Radical honesty instead of careful diplomacy." She turned to Vexthal. "Chancellor, I want you to select a delegation. Include members of your faction. Include skeptics. They should go to Earth and see for themselves. No filters, no careful presentations. Just reality." Vexthal looked surprised but nodded slowly. "As you command, Your Majesty. I will select carefully." Jake sent a message to Earth that same day. It was a long message explaining everything that had happened. He told them about the Zytharians, about their isolation, about the Queen's question and his answer. He told them that a delegation was coming, and that it was vitally important that humanity show its best side. The message would take weeks to reach Earth. The response would take weeks to come back. In the meantime, the humans and Zytharians continued to learn about each other. Dr. Peters made a breakthrough when he and the Zetharian doctors figured out how to adapt some human medicine to work with Zetharian biology. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The cooperation required both species to share knowledge they usually kept secret. It was a sign of growing trust. Thelazir and Ben became unlikely friends. The young Zetharian scientist and the Texan pilot spent hours together, working on a project to combine human and Zetharian engine technology. Ben taught Thelazir about human music, and Thelazir tried to explain Zetharian poetry, which apparently had 17 different layers of meaning. "It's like a puzzle," Ben explained to Jake one evening. "You think you understand what he's saying, and then he points out 3 other meanings you completely missed. It's frustrating and amazing at the same time." Amy made her own discovery. She found that the Zetharian language had 17 different words for various types of loneliness. There were words for being alone in a crowd, for missing someone who never existed, for the silence of empty cities. But there was no word for the joy of meeting someone new who wasn't afraid of you. "They're going to need a new word," she told Jake, "because they're experiencing something they've never felt before." Finally, after 6 weeks, the response from Earth arrived. Jake read it in private first, his heart pounding. The United Earth Coalition had approved everything. They were sending a ship, the Harmony Bridge, with a full diplomatic delegation. Artists, scientists, historians, teachers, even children. They wanted to show the Zetharians the full diversity of humanity. More importantly, they had agreed to Jake's suggestion. They would welcome the Zetharian observers with complete transparency. No tricks, no careful presentations. Just honest humanity in all its messy, chaotic glory. Jake brought the news to the Queen. "They're coming, Your Majesty, and they're excited to meet you. Earth is going to roll out the welcome mat." The Queen made that chittering sound that Jake now recognized as her laugh. "Then we must prepare. This delegation of yours, they will travel with our observers on the human ship?" "That's the plan," Jake confirmed. 6 weeks together in a confined space. They'll either become friends or drive each other crazy. Probably both. The Queen's antennae moved in a pattern that Amy's translator identified as anticipation mixed with nervousness. "Captain Morrison, you have changed our world with your laughter and your honesty. I hope your species understands what a gift that is." Jake smiled. "Your Majesty, we're just being ourselves. If that's enough to end 3,000 years of loneliness, then I'd say both our species are pretty lucky." The Harmony Bridge arrived 3 weeks later. Jake watched from the observation deck as the human ship came into view. It was smaller than the Zetharian station, but it was sleek and modern. It represented humanity's hope and curiosity, their desire to reach out and find friends among the stars. The Zetharian delegation was assembled and ready. Vexthal had chosen carefully. There were scientists, artists, soldiers, and common citizens. Some looked excited. Others looked terrified. All of them were about to take a leap of faith. Jake shook hands with the new arrivals and said goodbye to the Zetharians who were leaving. He gave them one piece of advice: be yourselves, he said. Don't try to be what you think humans want you to be. Just be who you are. That's all we're asking for. That's all we're offering in return. The Harmony Bridge was not a military ship. It was built for long voyages and comfortable living, but even the designers had not planned for passengers with forearms and shells that scraped against doorways built for humans. The first week was full of small disasters. A Zetharian engineer named Kelvan tried to improve the ship's reactor and almost caused a meltdown. The bathrooms were completely wrong for Zetharian biology. The sleeping quarters were too small. The food dispensers kept offering meals that would poison the Zetharian passengers. Commander Lisa Grant, the ship's captain, had her hands full. She was a tall woman with gray hair and a patient smile that was getting harder to maintain. This is fine, she kept saying. We're learning. It's all part of the process. But slowly things began to improve. A young human engineer named Kate Lopez started working with Thelazir on the reactor problem. Kate was small and energetic, with dark hair always tied in a messy ponytail. She talked fast and moved faster, and she didn't seem at all bothered by Thelazir's appearance. The problem, Kate explained, gesturing wildly with her hands, is that you're trying to optimize for efficiency, but our systems are built for stability. We need to find a middle ground. Thelazir's antennae moved in a way that suggested confusion. But why would you accept less efficiency? That makes no logical sense. Because, Kate said with a grin, We'd rather have a ship that works 90% of the time than one that works perfectly 99% of the time, but explodes on the 100th. Humans are paranoid about explosions. We've had some bad experiences. Together, they created a hybrid system that satisfied both safety and efficiency. It was better than what either species could have built alone. When they finally got it working, Kate high-fived Thelazir, who had no idea what the gesture meant but tried to copy it with all 4 of his hands at once. The result was awkward and hilarious, and they both ended up making sounds that their translators identified as laughter. The humans tried to share their culture with the Zitharian passengers. They showed them movies which confused the Zitharians at first. Why would you watch pretend stories about things that didn't happen? But slowly they began to understand. Humans used stories to explore ideas, to imagine possibilities, to connect with each other. One evening, the humans played a movie about a child who befriended an alien that everyone else feared. The Zitharians watched in silence. When it ended, one of them, an artist named Shelmora, spoke. "You make stories about this," Shelmora said, "about finding friends in unexpected places. This is common in human culture?" "Very common," confirmed Danny Foster, a young college student who had volunteered for the mission. Danny was enthusiastic about everything and seemed incapable of being nervous. "We have thousands of stories like that. Books, movies, TV shows, songs. It's kind of our favorite theme." Shelmora's antennae drooped. "We have stories too, but ours are different. They are about being alone, about searching and never finding. We never imagined stories like yours because we never thought they could be real." Danny smiled. "Well, now they can be. You're living one right now." Among the Zitharian delegation was Ambassador Velthar, a senior member of Vexthal's conservative faction. Velthar was old and skeptical. He had lived through centuries of isolation and had learned not to hope for change. He watched the humans carefully, looking for signs of deception, for proof that their acceptance was fake. He asked to be assigned a human companion who would show him Earth without any filters or diplomatic presentations. He wanted to see the real truth. Commander Grant assigned Danny to the task, figuring that Danny's honest enthusiasm would either win Velthar over or confirm his suspicions. As the Harmony Bridge approached Earth, the Zitharian passengers gathered at the observation windows. They saw a blue and green marble hanging in space, swirled with white clouds. It was smaller than their homeworld, but somehow looked more alive. "There's so much water," Thelazir said in wonder. The Zitharian homeworld was mostly desert and rock. Seeing a planet that was mostly ocean was almost unbelievable. Kate stood beside him. "Yeah, and it's full of life. Millions of species. Fish, whales, sharks, tiny things you can't even see without a microscope. The oceans are like their own alien world right on our planet." As they got closer, they could see the orbital stations, the satellites, the space traffic moving between Earth and Mars. Humans were busy in space, building and exploring and expanding. But what struck the Zitharians most was the sheer variety of life they detected on the planet's surface. Their sensors picked up biological signatures in every direction. "Your world is crowded," Velthar observed. "How do you manage with so many different species competing for resources?" Commander Grant considered the question. "Sometimes we don't manage well. We've driven species to extinction. We've destroyed habitats. We've made mistakes. But we're learning to do better. We're learning that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker." The landing site was in Switzerland, a mountainous country known for its neutrality and beautiful landscapes. The United Earth Coalition had prepared a welcoming ceremony, but they had followed Jake's advice. No weapons displays, no military formations. Just people, thousands of them, gathered to witness history. As the Harmony Bridge settled onto the landing pad, the Zitharian delegates prepared to disembark. They were nervous. For the first time in their lives, they were the outsiders. They were entering someone else's world, subject to someone else's rules. They were vulnerable. Thelazir stood at the airlock with Kate beside him. "What if they fear us?" he asked quietly. "What if we were wrong to hope?" Kate squeezed his arm gently, careful of his shell. "Then we'll deal with it. But I don't think that's going to happen. Trust me." The airlock opened. The Zitharian delegates stepped out into Earth's atmosphere for the first time. The gravity was slightly different from what they were used to. The air smelled strange, full of organic compounds and life. The sun was brighter than their red dwarf star back home. For a moment, there was silence. Thousands of humans stared at the Zitharians. The Zetharians stared back. The whole world was watching through cameras and broadcasts. Then someone in the crowd started clapping. Just one person at first, then another, then 10, then 100, then thousands. The applause grew into a roar. People were cheering, waving, holding up signs that said welcome in dozens of languages. Children were jumping up and down with excitement. Someone started chanting friends, 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 and others picked it up. Thelazir felt something he had never experienced before. His translator struggled to identify the emotion. It finally settled on overwhelming joy mixed with relief and belonging. Tears would have formed in his eyes if Zetharians could cry. "They're happy to see us," he said to Kate, his voice shaking. "They're actually happy," Kate grinned. "I told you. What did you expect? You're awesome." That simple statement, so casual and genuine, struck Thelazir more than any formal speech could have. Humans didn't just tolerate Zetharians. They genuinely thought they were cool. They were excited to meet them. They wanted to be friends. The formal ceremonies were brief. Nobody wanted to waste time with long speeches when there was so much to explore and learn. The Zetharian delegates were assigned human guides and given freedom to go wherever they wanted to see whatever interested them. Velthar pulled Danny aside. "I want to see your world as it really is," the old ambassador said. "No special treatment. No carefully prepared tours. Show me how humans actually live." Danny's eyes lit up. "You want the real deal? Okay, we'll start with my hometown. Fair warning, my grandmother is going to want to feed you and she doesn't take no for an answer." What followed was a week that would change Velthar's understanding of everything. Danny took him to shopping malls where children pointed at Velthar and asked excited questions. They visited schools where teachers used Velthar's presence as a teaching opportunity, discussing diversity and the importance of keeping an open mind. They went to a baseball game. Velthar had no idea what was happening on the field, but the crowd's energy was infectious. People in the seats around them wanted to take pictures with him. They asked him questions about his homeworld. They bought him a hot dog, then apologized when they remembered he couldn't eat it. Someone gave him a team hat which didn't really fit his head shape, but he wore it anyway because they seemed so happy about it. "You're going viral," Danny explained, showing Velthar his phone. "Look, someone posted a picture of you wearing the hat. It has 1 million likes already. People think you're amazing." Velthar looked at the comments under the picture. They were overwhelmingly positive. People were calling him cool, awesome, and adorable. Someone had already made artwork of him. Another person had written a short story about a Zetharian ambassador learning to play baseball. "I don't understand," Velthar said. "We've been here less than a week. Why do they care so much?" Danny shrugged. "Because you're new and different and interesting. Because we've been hoping for this since we first looked at the stars. Because making new friends is exciting. Take your pick." They visited Danny's hometown, a small city in Oregon. Danny's grandmother, Mrs. Foster, was a tiny woman in her 80s who wore colorful sweaters and baked cookies for everyone. She took one look at. 6 months after first contact, the galaxy was changing. Humans and Zetharians were no longer strangers but partners. Research stations were built in neutral space, staffed by scientists from both species. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges became common. But the most important changes were the personal ones. Jake Morrison had been promoted to Admiral and given a new title, Chief Ambassador to the Coalition of Worlds. It was a fancy name for a job that mostly involved solving problems no one had imagined before, like figuring out how to design furniture that worked for both humans and Zetharians, or mediating disputes between engineers who had very different ideas about how ships should work. He spent a lot of time talking with Queen Thesarovic. They had developed a genuine friendship. The Queen appreciated Jake's straightforward honesty. Jake appreciated that the Queen could laugh at herself and didn't take everything too seriously. One day they were sitting in a garden on the Zetharian station. The Zetharians had created artificial ecosystems that mimicked their homeworld. Strange plants with crystalline leaves grew everywhere. The light was dimmer than Earth's, softer and tinged with purple. "Jake," the Queen said, using his first name as she often did now in private. "I've been thinking about that day in the throne room, when I asked my question and you laughed." Jake smiled at the memory. "What about it?" "I realize now that I was asking the wrong question," the Queen said. Her antennae moved in a pattern that Jake had learned meant she was being thoughtful. "The real question wasn't whether you found us hideous. It was whether we could be vulnerable enough to show our true selves to someone else. That's the frightening part. That's the brave part, Jake nodded. Yeah, it takes courage to let people see who you really are. There's always a risk they won't like what they find. But you didn't just accept us, the Queen continued. You laughed. You found joy in the meeting. That changed everything. Jake considered this. I guess I did. But it was real. I wasn't trying to be diplomatic or careful. I just reacted honestly. And honestly, the idea that someone as magnificent as you would worry about being ugly was so ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh. The Queen made her chittering laugh. Magnificent. You use that word a lot when describing us. Do you know what we thought when we first saw humans? What? We thought you looked soft and vulnerable, fragile. Your faces show every emotion. You have no natural armor. You seem so easy to hurt. The Queen's antennae drooped slightly. And then you showed us that this apparent weakness is actually a strength. You're soft enough to bend without breaking. You're vulnerable enough to connect with others. You show your emotions because you're not afraid to be seen. Jake hadn't thought of it that way before. I guess we are pretty squishy compared to you guys. But you're right. We wear our hearts on our sleeves, as we say, for better or worse. But not everyone was happy about the growing friendship between the species. Even after Velthar's positive report from Earth, some Zitharians remained suspicious. High Chancellor Vexthul had softened his opposition, but there were others who filled his place. A group called the Preservation Front argued that the Zitharians were losing their identity by mixing with humans. They said that accepting human culture would dilute what made Zitharians unique. They were loud and organized, and they were starting to gain support. Jake knew this was a problem. He had seen it happen on Earth throughout history. Fear of change could turn into fear of the other. It could destroy everything they had built. The solution came from an unexpected source. Veltar, the former skeptic who had spent a week on Earth, proposed a bold plan. Instead of just having humans and Zitharians interact with each other, why not try to find other species? If they could make contact with a third species using the lessons they had learned, it would prove that what happened between humans and Zitharians wasn't a fluke. The Queen approved the plan. A ship was prepared with a mixed crew of humans and Zitharians. Velthar would lead the Zitharian delegation. Amy Brooks, who had become an expert in first contact protocols, would represent humanity. Their target was the Kelvorian Collective, a species that the Zitharians had encountered 200 years ago. The Kelvorians had withdrawn into their territory and refused all communication since that first meeting. If anyone could bridge that gap, it would be a team that understood both sides of fear and acceptance. The journey took 3 months. During that time, Velthar and Amy debated strategy constantly. Velthar wanted to be cautious, to approach slowly. Amy wanted to be open and honest from the start. The Zitharians scared them away before, Velthar argued. We must be careful not to repeat that mistake. The mistake wasn't approaching them, Amy countered. It was approaching them with military ships and formal protocols. You came across as conquerors, not friends. We need to show them that things have changed. They compromised. They would approach openly but peacefully. They would broadcast images of humans and Zitharians working together, living together, being friends. They would let the Kelvorians choose how much contact they wanted. When they entered Kelvorian space, they were immediately confronted by defense fleets. But instead of weapons fire, they received a message. It was simple and direct, Zitharians detected. Maintain distance, Amy responded with a video message. She showed footage from Earth. Zitharian children playing with human children, scientists working side by side in laboratories, artists collaborating on projects, ordinary citizens of both species going about their daily lives together. She explained that humans had recently met Zitharians and had become friends. She invited the Kelvorians to learn more if they were interested. Then they waited. Hours passed. The bridge crew was tense. Every sensor was active, watching for any sign of weapons charging or ships approaching. But all they got was silence. Finally, a response came. It was a long message, and as it played, both Velthar and Amy realized that they had been wrong about why the Kelvorians had fled 2 centuries ago. The Kelvorians were not afraid of how Zitharians looked. They had fled because the Zitharian fleet arrived in overwhelming force. The Zitharians had used formal diplomatic language that sounded cold and transactional. They had sent military ships instead of civilian vessels. They had behaved exactly like conquerors assessing future territory. The Kelvorians had assumed the Zitharians were going to invade. They had retreated not out of disgust but out of fear of conquest. The misunderstanding had lasted 200 years because neither side had tried to clear it up. Velthar listened to the message in stunned silence. "We frightened them," he said quietly. "Not with our appearance but with our approach. We were so afraid of being rejected that we armored ourselves in formality and military might. We became what we feared others would think we were." Amy put a hand on his arm. "But now we can fix it. Now we know better." What followed was the most delicate negotiation either species had ever attempted. Amy and Velthar worked together, with Amy teaching the Zitharians how to communicate with openness and vulnerability, and Velthar helping the humans understand Kelvorian culture and concerns. The breakthrough came when Velthar recorded a personal message. He told the Kelvorians about his journey to Earth, about his skepticism and his fears. He told them about Danny and Mrs. Foster and learning to play cards. He told them about realizing that his people had been wrong, that isolation wasn't safety but loneliness. "I was afraid," Velthar said in the message. "I was afraid that no one would ever accept us. And that fear made me push people away before they could reject me. But I learned that vulnerability is not weakness. Showing others who you truly are is the bravest thing you can do. I hope you will give us a chance to show you who we have become." The Kelvorians agreed to a meeting. They sent a small ship to rendezvous with the human Zitharian vessel. When the Kelvorians came aboard, they were small and quick, with 6 legs and large eyes. They looked nothing like humans or Zitharians. There was an awkward moment when everyone first saw each other. Then one of the Kelvorians made a sound that their translator identified as nervous amusement. A human crew member laughed. Velthar made his chittering sound. And suddenly everyone was laughing together at the absurdity of all the fear and misunderstanding. The Kelvorians stayed for 3 days. They learned about the friendship between humans and Zitharians. They shared their own culture and history. They made plans for further contact and cooperation. When the mission returned to human and Zitharian space, they brought news that changed the political landscape. The Preservation Front lost most of its support. If the methods that worked between humans and Zitharians also worked with a third species, then maybe they really had discovered something important. Maybe the universe wasn't as cold and lonely as everyone had thought. High Chancellor Vexthul, who had watched everything unfold, requested a meeting with Jake and the Queen. When they gathered in the Queen's private chambers, the old Chancellor looked different. His posture was less rigid, less defensive. "I was wrong," Vexthul said simply. "I spent centuries believing that our isolation kept us safe. I see now that it only kept us alone. Admiral Morrison, Queen Thesarovic, I formally withdraw my opposition to the Human-Zitharian alliance. More than that, I offer my services to help build what comes next." Jake stood in. 1 year after the laughter in the throne room, Unity Station opened its doors. The station hung in neutral space between Earth and the Zitharian core worlds. It was massive, a collaboration between human and Zitharian engineers that neither species could have built alone. Different sections accommodated different environments. There were areas with thick atmosphere for species who needed it, vacuum-sealed chambers for those who didn't, and gravity zones that could be adjusted from 0 to 3 times Earth normal. On opening day, representatives from 7 different species gathered in the main hall. Humans and Zitharians, of course. The Kelvorians sent a full delegation. There were also the Skyleth, bird-like beings with beautiful feathers and voices that sounded like music. The Deepborn came too, aquatic creatures who moved through water-filled chambers connected to the main hall. The Luminar sent representatives, crystalline beings who communicated through light and sound. And the Scattered Minds appeared, energy-based entities that humans had helped the Zitharians contact months earlier. The diversity was stunning. Every species looked completely different from every other. Some had eyes, some didn't. Some had solid bodies, others were made of energy. Some breathed oxygen, others would die in it. But they were all here, all willing to try something new. Queen Thesarovic stood at the center of the hall, her purple and blue shell gleaming under the lights. She looked at the assembled species and felt an emotion she had rarely experienced in her long life. Hope. For 3,000 years, the Queen began, her voice translated into 7 different languages simultaneously. My people traveled the stars alone. We built wonders. We achieved great things. But we were lonely. We believed we were meant to be isolated, that something about us made it impossible to connect with others. She gestured to the gathered species. Then we met humans. And a human captain looked at me and laughed when I asked if we were hideous. He laughed not at us, but at the idea that being different meant being unacceptable. That laughter changed everything. The Queen's antennae moved in a pattern of deep emotion. I learned that we were not alone because of what we looked like. We were alone because of how we approached others. We came in military might, hiding our true selves behind formality and power. We never showed vulnerability. We never took the risk of being truly seen. She looked at Jake, who stood nearby in his dress uniform. He looked uncomfortable with all the attention, which made the Queen's antennae twitch with amusement. Admiral Morrison taught us that the bridge between species is not built on careful diplomacy or military strength. It is built on honesty, on showing who you really are, and accepting others as they truly are, on being willing to laugh together at our fears and our differences. A Skylith representative spoke, their voice musical and clear. We too have been afraid. We thought our ways of thinking were too different from others. But the humans and Zetharians showed us that different is not wrong. Different is interesting. A Deepborn added their own thoughts, their words bubbling through the water of their chamber. We lived in our oceans, believing we could never understand those who lived on land or in the void of space. But understanding comes from trying, not from assuming it is impossible. Jake was called to speak. He walked to the center of the hall, feeling the eyes of 7 different species on him. Some of those eyes were compound like the Zetharians. Some were huge and dark like the Skylith. Some weren't eyes at all, but other ways of seeing. All of them were watching him. I'm not good at speeches, Jake began, which made several species make sounds that their translators identified as amusement. So I'm just going to tell you the truth, same as I always have. He looked around at the different beings. Humans aren't special. We're not better than anyone here. We've made plenty of mistakes. We've fought wars over stupid things. We've hurt each other and ourselves. We're far from perfect, he paused. But we did learn something. We learned that being different doesn't have to divide us. We learned that you can be afraid of something and still choose to understand it instead of running from it. We learned that laughter is better than fear, and honesty is better than careful lies. Jake gestured to the station around them. This place, this coalition of worlds, it's not built on treaties or trade deals. Those things matter, sure, but what really holds us together is simpler than that. It's the willingness to show our true selves to strangers, to ask honest questions and give honest answers, to laugh at our fears instead of letting them control us. He smiled. When Queen Thesseravik asked me if she was hideous, she wasn't really asking about her appearance. She was asking if she could be accepted for who she truly is. That's the question we all have. That's the fear we all carry. And the answer is yes. Yes, you can be accepted. Yes, you can be seen and understood and valued. But first you have to be brave enough to let others see you. The hall was quiet. Then the Kelvorian representative stepped forward. This coalition, it is open to all who will join. To anyone willing to meet others with honesty and respect, Jake confirmed. To anyone brave enough to show their true selves and accept others in return. That's the only requirement. The formal ceremony continued, with each species signing agreements and making commitments. But the real work happened after, in the smaller gatherings and personal conversations. Humans and Zetharians helping others navigate the station. Kelvorians sharing their art with Skylith. Deepborn teaching humans about their underwater architecture. The Luminar showing everyone how they created light sculptures. In one corner, Thelazir and Kate were working on a new project, trying to create a universal translator that would work better than the current systems. They argued constantly about the best approach, but it was friendly arguing, the kind that came from mutual respect and shared goals. In another area, Velthar was leading a program to help other species overcome first contact anxiety. He shared his own story of fear and acceptance, of going to Earth expecting to find deception and instead finding friends. Young beings from different species listened with fascination. Dr. Peters had become famous among multiple species for his work in comparative biology. He was writing a comprehensive guide to xenobiology, documenting the incredible variety of life in the galaxy. He worked with scientists from every species, learning and teaching in equal measure. Amy had been promoted to captain of the exploration vessel Discovery. Her mission was to continue making first contact with new species, using what had become known as the Morrison Protocol. Approach with humility, communicate with honesty, show your true self, And remember that laughter is often better than careful diplomacy. High Chancellor Vex Thule had taken on a new role as Minister of Cultural Preservation. His job was to make sure that in the rush to unite, no species lost its unique identity. It was important work. Unity didn't mean everyone becoming the same. It meant everyone being themselves while accepting others. Months passed. The coalition grew. More species joined, each bringing their own unique perspectives and challenges. There were misunderstandings and conflicts, of course. Different species had different values, different ways of thinking, but they worked through it together, with patience and humor and the understanding that friendship required effort. One evening, Jake found himself back in that familiar throne room where it had all begun. The room had changed. Now there were artifacts from multiple species displayed on the walls, art and technology and cultural treasures from across the coalition. The lonely room had become a celebration of diversity. Queen Thesarovic joined him. They stood together, looking at a holographic display that showed the expanding coalition of worlds. New contacts were being made every month. The galaxy was not empty. It had never been empty. It had just been waiting for someone to build the first bridge. "I've been thinking about that day," the Queen said. "When I asked my question and you laughed." Jake smiled. "You bring that up a lot, Your Majesty?" "Because it matters," the Queen said. That moment changed the course of galactic history. One question, one honest answer, and everything was different. "I've never properly thanked you," she continued, "for seeing us, for accepting us, for laughing at the absurdity of thinking we couldn't be accepted." Jake shook his head. "Your Majesty, you don't need to thank me for telling the truth. That laugh, that was just me being relieved. Relieved that we'd found friends in the most unexpected place. Relieved that the universe wasn't as cold as we'd feared." He grinned, the same casual expression that had started everything. "Besides, that's what you do when you find friends. You don't thank them for existing. You celebrate with them." The Queen's antennae moved in the pattern Jake had learned meant she was feeling amused and content. "Then let us celebrate, Admiral Morrison. We have a galaxy to explore. I suspect we will find many more species waiting for someone to laugh with them instead of running from them." She looked at the holographic display again. "Do you think they are out there? Others like us who have been alone and afraid? Who believe they are meant to be isolated?" "Probably," Jake said. "The galaxy is a big place. I bet there are plenty of species who are hiding because they're afraid no one will accept them, or who are aggressive because they're trying to protect themselves.